In this video, we are going to talk about the different levels or the scale that we are going to use or we might use in the definition of probability and the definition of impact of potential risk. We are still in the qualitative assessment and qualitative analysis of the identified risks, and we are trying to make kind of ranking for the different risks that we got. Which risks are severe, which risks are moderate, which risks are low effect and low severity. So for example, we have this slide in front of us. We have 5-point scale from 1 to 5, and the corresponding definition for that, like rare, unlikely, possible, likely, almost certain. And these are the definitions for each one. For example, rare is when the risk event may only occur in exceptional circumstances, like we have experienced that just once or few times out of tens or out of 100 or out of hundreds of times that we got. So in this case, the probability is very, very low, and we assume that very rare. But we have some experiences with that, or others in the industry have some experiences with that. That's why we have to include that in our register. Level number 2, when the probability is about 25% or less than 25% chance of occurring. So that might happen in more frequency than what we got in level 1, and so on. For level number 3, possible. In this case, we have considerable frequency. Again, we are talking about just an example. We are putting very rough numbers, or actually very random numbers. So in level 3 probability, it is between 25 to 50% chance of occurrence. In level 4, it is between 50 and 75. In level 5, it is very high. That's more than 75%. Actually, this is the level when we make the plan. If we have that possibility and that probability for an incident to happen, we plan for this. We usually plan for events and incidents that's close to 100%, because we never have 100%. For other cases, we have to consider if we are talking about other low levels of risk. For example, we might go for events from probability from 0 to 10%, and level 2 from 10 to 20%, level 3 from 20 to 30%, level 4 from 30 to 40%, level 5 from 40 to 50%. That's another scale. If we are talking in an oil and gas industry project, for example, and we have probability of fatalities, in this case, we cannot tolerate more than 1 in a million, for example. So the highest level to be tolerated, the highest we have in the risk register, is 1 in a million. So in this case, we might go in level 1, like 1 times 10 to minus 10. And this is 1 times 10 to minus 9. And this is 1 times 10 to minus 8. And this is 1 times 10 to minus 7. And this is 1 times 10 to minus 6, which is 1 in a million. So we have different values for the probability. Depends on the projects, depends on the risk type itself, depends on the tolerance that we might have, and so on. So this is just an example. And these numbers depends on the risk management team and also the scale. Whatever we are going for, 5-point scale, 3-point scale, 7-point scale, 4-point scale, whatever. We don't have a mandatory scale, but we are just here making kind of clarification for the scale. We must have a scale. So the different disciplines for risk owners from different disciplines, they can set kind of analysis or kind of assessment for the risk that they own. And how can we manage that? And this is another scale. We can find the objective, the cost, the time, scope, quality. These are the objectives that we have, and here is the impact. If the impact is very low, for example, we are assuming it is 0.05 out of the cost that we have, or the time, or the scope, or the quality. And how can we manage the value of 0.05 out of quality and 0.05 out of scope? It is very difficult, but we have to manage that. What is the definition of very low for scope, and what is the definition of very low for quality? We have to explain this. What is the definition of very high for scope and quality? We have to define each one of those items. For example, for scope, very low means barely noticed change. Almost there is no change, but there is some change, but it is not effective. Low in this case, low here means minor change. We can notice this change, and there is kind of change in the scope. The scope is not exactly as it was defined in the initial phase of the project, in the conceptual phase of the project. Moderate, there is kind of major change. We have considerable change affecting the scope. High, if we are having kind of unacceptable level by the sponsor. The sponsor is not going to accept that change. It is very high. So in this case, we have to sit with the sponsor and discuss the issue, discuss the impact on time, discuss the impact on the cost, discuss the impact on the business need for that project, and so on. The very high, the project or the product is useless, and we have to find alternative for sure for that. This is an example again. If we are talking about quality, very low is, again, the specs are almost met. If it is low, we have to make kind of modification for this. If it is moderate change for the specs and quality, the sponsor needs to approve the change that we have for the specs. If the objective impact is high, that means it is not accepted by the sponsor, and we have to find some solution for this challenge. Very high, that means beyond the tolerance of the sponsor, and for sure it is not accepted, and we have to manage that somehow by other alternative. When we are talking about cost and time, it is very simply to be measured. Whenever we are talking about very low, that's for example up to 5%. If it is low, that means up to 10%. If it is moderate, up to 20%. If it is high, that's up to 40%. We can see here in this scale or in this table that usually we have the red zone to the right. When the risk is very high impact, that means that's the maximum tolerance that the sponsor can accept. We cannot go for the red zone. The red zone is forbidden zone. If we are talking about the orange zone here, in this case, we have to find some alternative or some correction or some remedy in order to satisfy the needs of the sponsor. Even here, we have to get some discussion with the sponsor to find the different alternatives with that. If you are in the yellow zone, in this case, the changes or the risk might affect the sponsor's expectation, but it is within the tolerance of that, and so on. So based on that, this type of scale, we can find how can we manage the different potential risks that we have and their impact on different objectives, cost or time or scope or quality, based on the sponsor needs and sponsor's expectations. In this matrix, we can see stakeholder tolerance matrix. In the previous slide, we discussed the tolerance of the sponsor, but we have other sponsors, we have other stakeholders in the project that we have to consider as well. We have the project manager, which one of the most important stakeholders in the project, the technical manager, marketing manager, IT manager. For each one of those stakeholders, we might have different tolerance for each risk that we got. So we have to consider those different tolerances. Usually for the high level of authority, we have lower tolerance, or actually we have narrower tolerance. Whenever we are going for lower level of authority, the tolerance is more tight and more narrow. So that's why the sponsor usually has the wider tolerance or the highest tolerance that could be. The project manager will have less tolerance. The technical manager and marketing manager and IT managers, for example, will have lower tolerance than the project manager. The technical people and the technicians that we have in the project usually will have kind of lower and lower tolerance for the measures that we got. For example, for the project manager, in this screen, the project manager requirements is deliver product as requested based on the specs that we have for each element. The time will be within 10%. The cost will be within 5% plus or minus. The quality will be like the specs exactly. For technical manager, for example, the time would be within 20%. For the cost, it will be like 10%. And so on. So it depends on the risk event that we are talking about, depends on the discipline that we are talking about, depends on the sponsor's tolerance, depends on the project manager tolerance as well, and so on. So we have multiple variants actually governing these values that we have in the tolerance slide. In this slide, we have kind of combination between the probability on the left, rare, unlikely, possible, likely, almost certain, and between the impact, insignificant, minor, moderate, major, and extreme. If we have low impact, which is insignificant, and low probability, which is rare, so we are in this cell, which we have very low impact and very low probability and very low severity of that risk in case of occurrence. We are going for one with moderate impact and moderate probability. In this case, the severity of the risk if it occurs will be medium. We are going more serious with a risk with major impact and likely probability. In this case, the risk severity will be high. Going more and more severe for extreme impact of that category and almost certain probability of that probability, this will be extremely high risk, which is the red zone, that which we called in the previous slide the forbidden area. The sponsor will not accept to pass the borders of the red zone. Maybe if we are talking about the orange zone, we can discuss this with the sponsor, and either we have to convince him or he has to convince us with the alternatives. Otherwise, we can manage that somehow. Usually, the potential risks that we have in the green zone, all of those potential risks that might be allocated in the green zone, usually we don't consider in the quantitative analysis. In the quantitative analysis, usually we focus on the risk in the orange zone and the yellow zone. How about the risks in the green zone? We can monitor them and put them on what is called watch list, so they might change. Those impact or those probabilities might change to move into the yellow zone, into the medium zone. But we have to consider that in our control process during the execution of the project. Oh, very nice. I like this actually. In this case, I was just talking about we have to monitor the low risks, the watch list of the potential risks that we have, because it might change. It might jump from bottom up or might jump from top to the bottom. It depends on the changes that we have in the project. Whatever the prices, whatever the capacity and the effectiveness of the contractors and the suppliers and the project manager and the management team, we have very vast varieties of potentials that might affect the values of the probability and the values of impact on different objectives, cost, time, scope, and quality. That's why we are in a game like this, snake and ladder. We are talking about jumps up or jumps down that might happen for the different risks that even it was in the watch list or was in the serious area of the risks that we got. That's another explanation for the risks that we have. We have kind of acceptable region in the green zone and what is tolerable region in the orange zone, and we have kind of unacceptable region. This is the forbidden area that we have in this area. It depends on the, for example, that we have the maximum tolerable limits for the risk that we have, whatever we are talking about cost or talking about fatalities. The same on the other side that we have to the right, minimum tolerable limit, blah, blah, blah. Usually this diagram is used if we have two major parameters like fatality and cost, like time and cost, and so on. So this shows what is the limits that we have for different risks. If the cost will be less than, for example, $1,000, we are in the green zone. If the loss is less than 1 million, so we are in the between 1,000 and 1 million, that's in the orange zone, for example, and so on. So that's another explanation for the tolerance and the risks and the potential risks that we might have in the project that we are planning risk for. Thank you.